Absolutely right, Dr. McRae. Some of them have buyer's remorse. Others, this appears to be precisely what they wanted. We're really excited to also be joined in this conversation by Professor and attorney Adjoa Aiyetoro. She's certainly a renowned civil rights attorney. She's a reparations advocate. I call her just an expert on reparations. If you want to know anything about reparations and the right to reparations and the fight for reparations, Professor Aiyetoro is the person to talk to. Welcome back to Igniting Change, Professor Aiyetoro.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be back.
And we were talking a little bit in the beginning of the show with regards to what's happening in New York and why you and Barbara Arnwine are there. Could you share with the audience why you all are in New York City at this hearing?
Oh, definitely. Barbara and I came to the fourth session of the Permanent Forum of People for African Descent. This is an outgrowth of long time coming, outgrowth of the World Conference Against Racism, where African peoples and people of African descent were there and helped obtain the language in the document that slavery, especially the transatlantic slave trade, it was a crime against humanity and should always have been so. And it indicates that reparations should be paid to African peoples and African peoples of African descent. And so the fourth session that we're attending is very interesting to me. This is the first one that I've attended since WCAR. Barbara and I were very, very active and in the leadership in many ways at WorkCom of the African descendant groups. I was in the leadership of chairing or co-chairing, facilitating our African descendant caucuses. Barbara was was on the drafting committee and one of the major drafters of the NGO documents. It's interesting. I made a couple of notes because I wanted to share some things that I find to be very interesting. I just came out of a session that was focused on reparatory justice and had speakers from CARICOM, which is out of the Caribbean, and Nkechi Taifa, who is from the United States, and has been a leader in the reparations movement since even before we founded in 1987 in Cobra. She's one of the co-founders along with me and a bunch of others. But she spoke for civil society. And the interesting point I wanted to share with your audience that Nkechi made that I thought was critical, and she got applause for it, was that right now they're focused on states being in the international arena, being countries leading pushing for leading the reparations movement. But she said the actual drive for and push for reparations came out of civil society, came out of individuals and organizations that lifted it up. There's one other point there if I could make. I don't know if you have time for me to make it.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, the other point I want to make, which is interesting, yesterday I attended a session, the Church of England, and they had panelists that they had the Archbishop of the Church of England and representing the Jesuits, actually, and they had representatives from Barbados and Kenya on the panel talking about the crimes that the Church of England had committed in slavery, embracing slavery and the brutalization. And the thing that was interesting that I'm combining with what I just heard today in this other panel was that the Church of England, the Archbishop said that we had to humble ourselves and we had to admit to the crimes that we had committed. We had to admit that. We had to own that, and that was, in fact, a passage work that we had to do, a passage that we had to go through. Today, there were descendants of enslavers from the Caribbean who made a similar point that they went to the reparations movement leadership in Caribbean, particularly CARICOM, to say, what should we do? How can we do? One of the things that is important, I think, is that a woman, the Archbishop said that the person who is the director of their program out of the United States and now is international, her name, I'm blanking on her name right now, I'm sorry I didn't write it down, said to them, you can join and support and build the reparations, but you can't decide what reparations is. That's a decision by those who have been the abused, the victims of your injury. So they built, the Church of England has 100, Barbara converted it to U.S. dollars. It's 100 million pounds of a fund to develop programs of reparations. Barbara, I think, says $180 million. That fund, that's a huge fund. But what he was saying is he was told by his director is, you all can't decide what reparations are. You can only be able to fund it. So I wanted to make those points. I can answer the other questions, but those were, I thought, important for me at least.
Yeah, no, those are great thoughts. And for one thing, for our listeners, Professor Aiyetoro, because folks are listening to you talking about reparations internationally. A lot of folks, particularly Americans, we tend to think of reparations only for our country and those that were enslaved here in the United States. Mm-hmm. So, when you're at this conference where you are, could you sort of share with our audience how it isn't just the United States that's the focus of reparations, but wherever slavery actually occurred? Is that accurate?
It's accurate. It's all over the world. We have people talking about the enslavement and the brutality of people of African descent, African peoples all over. We had speaker today from Brazil, Trinidad and Tobago. The Cubans spoke in support of reparations. We had from all over Haiti. Haiti talked about they were the only ones that have had to pay their oppressors, France, reparations. And so part of their demand is to get what they paid back and extend the reparations even beyond that. So, no, it's worldwide. It's everywhere. It's from Africa to everywhere in the African diaspora, Great Britain or England, all over.
One of the things that I find really fascinating is that, when we talked about reparations in the United States, and I just wanted to focus on the United States for just a second, when we focused on reparations in the United States, the question was always raised, what does the reparations look like? What would reparations look like? And I know that you were involved at Georgetown University with regards to the battle that was going on there because Georgetown was built by enslaved hands. And they did have a formula that they were able to come up with. And I think you were instrumental in working in that litigation against Georgetown on the reparations piece. Could you share with our audience what reparations could look like and how we end up going to local governments and state governments within the United States in addition to the battle for reparations?
Oh, exactly. Well, first of all, I want to use the phrase that was coined by one of the INCOBRA's founders and leaders of the reparations movement, who is no longer with us in physical form, Dorothy Benton Lewis. And Dorothy would say, reparations is more than a check. So many people think of reparations as a check. Give me my whatever, nickel, $500, $5,000, whatever. But reparations is more than a check, because what is the base of the word reparations? It's repair. right? Repair. You cannot repair the injuries that have been inflicted upon African peoples and peoples of African descent in the United States if we want to just stay there in terms of the enslavement and legacies of slavery by just giving whoever. I mean, some people say that the only people who should get reparations, narrow view, are people who can show that they're descendants of enslaved Africans. But we also know that the legacy of slavery has, the criminal punishment system, the voter suppression that you all work on so well, those things. They don't sit there and say, well, the only people we're going to put in prison with little or no evidence. So the only people we're going to say you can't vote or you have to stand in this long line and have a negative impact on whether people can vote or not because they can't, they're tired or they don't want to go through all the stuff. Voter suppression. They don't say, but I will only do this to people who can show that they are descendants of enslaved Africans. So the issue really is the legacy of slavery is a legacy in all these different areas. So the inequalities, the abuse that continue in all of these areas, or for people who look like us, who are dark, who are black, and so the reparations for the legacies of slavery has to be one that is broad. We have to look at it beyond a check. We have to look at changing systems. To me, the work that you all do around voter suppression, ending voter suppression, putting in place structures that won't allow it to come back and that repair in many ways the injuries that have been suffered by communities of color because of our black communities, because of voter suppression is a form of reparations. Developing criminal punishment structures. When I was in Arkansas, one of the things that came out of a study that the program I was heading did that showed that it was data. It was beyond the the narrative. We have the anecdotal evidence when we look at states and we say black people only make up 15% of the state, but they make up 40, 50, 60% of those incarcerated. We did a detailed study that showed that, in fact, similarly situated black men and white men got different treatment. Same crime, same educational background, all of that got where black people would get and we look at homicide, black men were significantly more likely to get the death penalty or life without parole as compared to white men who most generally got a term of years. So reparations is ending those structures, putting in place things that end those structures. In addition to if there is a check that can be given, educational things, for example, scholarship funds, so that, and that's what they have set up. You talked about Georgetown. They have set up out of that program that we worked on. It's not just Georgetown now. And one of the fortuitous things that happened yesterday is we had issues me and Barbara getting in to the United Nations. I had a pass, and Barbara insisted, no, you go on, because they made a mistake. They made an error with Barbara. She's now in today. And I went, and the fortuitous thing is, I go in. I'm looking for the section on the Church of England because it looks very good in writing. I asked this priest, I said, can you tell me how to get to this conference room? He looked at me and said, Aiyetoro. I had worked with Father Kasiki back in the Georgetown area. We were developing ideas of what would reparations look like for the descendants of those that Georgetown sold down the river to Louisiana in order to keep themselves out of bankruptcy. And they have a magnificent program. And he kept saying, you and Nkechi Taifa are the reason these are the ideas we talked about then. You shared these ideas. And they have raised millions of dollars to put this scholarship fund, programs for descendants who are aging so they can age with dignity, those kinds of things. And that's reparations. It's more than a check.
Wow. And, Dr. McRae, I'm listening to Professor Aiyetoro run through what is reparations and talking about Georgetown and talking about what has happened internationally, what has happened nationally with regards to the fight for reparations. What becomes really interesting is this, and one of the things she's laid out, I think, is this, Dr. McRae, is that she said, reparations is about more than getting a check. She also